This portrait by his mother shows Wilhelm at the age of 20, when he'd had his first chance to conduct a full-scale orchestra. The program consisted of an adagio by himself and Bruckner's Ninth Symphony. His own composition met with little success, but there were many who realized the talent of the inexperienced young conductor. The next stages were positions as assistant conductor or chorus master in Zurich, Munich, and Strasbourg, where he was the third conductor under Hans Pfitzner, conducting repertory operas. In Lübeck, he was appointed concert conductor from among 97 applicants. A music lover, Lily Diekmann, recalls,
"There is in him an inspiring power which has an impact equally on the orchestra and on the audience. True, his physical manner is still indescribably funny. He moves his arms about like a windmill and makes the most atrocious grimaces. His legs, too, have their special movements, so that the whole figure appears to be in an incredible turmoil. But you forget and forgive everything because of what is provided for the ear."
In the spring of 1915, Furtwangler was appointed opera conductor at Mannheim. In 1922, at the age of 36, he succeeded Arthur Nikisch at the Leipzig Gewandhaus and at the Berlin Philharmonic, the most important orchestra in Germany. It had been formed in 1884 by 54 musicians who had pledged their inseparable mutual loyalty. A democratic artists' republic in Imperial Germany. Hans von Bülow had given the orchestra personality, discipline, precision. Nikisch, flexibility, color, a sonorous melodic beauty. Furtwangler combined these elements and produced a symphonic style that has endured.
Nowadays, people are apt to prize a clean and accurate reproduction of what's written in the score above everything else. Can one do justice in a line drawing to a work whose significance lies in its vision of color? The duty of the performer is to go back continually to the style of the work itself and base himself on that. The stronger the structure of a work is, and the greater a composer's mastery of form, the more clearly defined is the interpreter's task. It's only when he has studied and mastered the details that his real task begins, the weaving of all the particular into an organic whole. There's only one correct conception of a Beethoven symphony, so one can only hope to approximate to it.
Yehudi Menuhin first performed with Furtwangler in 1947.
This most beautiful of places in violin literature will remain forever associated, for me, with Wilhelm Furtwangler. He knew how to create magic. Of course, the magic is already in the music, but the interpreter, fortunately, has a great part to play before that music becomes communicable to the world. It is something that will never leave me, this memory of playing this concerto and a few others with him, unfortunately not all the others, because he could recreate, because his mind and his spirit were not only bordered, as it were, by the score. They brought a whole world to the score.
He kept most of his original creativeness within his capacity for interpretation, for re-creation.
It is about his interpretations and his style of conducting that one of the two main controversies about Furtwangler revolved. Hans Keller, musician and writer.
He has been criticized for imprecision. The criticism is justified, but the evaluation isn't. Which is to say that where Furtwangler was imprecise, he not only wanted to be, but the composer wanted him to be. Let me give you one example. First, a performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony under Toscanini. I wasn't there myself, but I gather that as soon as the introductory bars, Furtwangler, who was there, jumped up from his seat, shouted bloody time beater, and left the concert hall. What had happened, what had aroused him so, was that Toscanini took the opening sextuplets very precisely, so that you could hear them as sextuplets. Now comes the other part of the story, and that is Furtwangler's own performance of the opening of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. There you couldn't hear a thing. You certainly couldn't hear sextuplets. What you could hear was a vague, tense noise, the beginning before the beginning, as it were, which is exactly what Beethoven had intended it to be.
Furtwangler's tempi also often aroused disagreement.
It's generally said that Furtwangler took very slow tempi. This is really what you mean. Well, sometimes he did and sometimes he didn't. Quite often he took far faster tempi than other people. Well, that is so fast a tempo that if you put it in the abstract to anybody, if you asked any musician whether the movement was possible at this speed, he would say no. And that would include myself before I had heard the Furtwangler performance, which, however, only goes to show that tempo in itself is nothing. Tempo is a function of structure, and hence in performance a function of phrasing. You can't decide on a tempo before A, you have experienced the structure, and if you are a listener, before you have experienced the phrasing of the interpreter in question.
Furtwangler himself answered his critics in relation to his performances of Beethoven.
I should not take these tempi if I were not convinced that they were the tempi of Beethoven. The long and the short of it is that an interpreter can render only what he has first lived through. A formula for the correct rendering of everything. No, there isn't such a thing.